Ashleigh is an experienced practitioner working within the government sectors. As Audit Manager at Audit Scotland, Ashleigh has undertaken performance analysis and appraisal on major transport infrastructure projects across Scotland. She joins us today to provide insights into a report she's authored on sustainable transport and policy recommendations that have now been shared with the Scottish Government. So we're keeping up the Scottish vibe on this section in support of advancing sustainable travel and reducing car use. Ashleigh.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me along today. I'm really keen to talk to you today about our audit of sustainable transport and government's target to reduce car use. I think there's a lot of interesting lessons here for policymakers across the country around setting ambitious targets and then following through and actually seeing any progress. Next slide, please. So I thought not all of you will know who we are here at Audit Scotland, so I thought I would just give you a quick intro into who we are. So we audit the public sector on behalf of the Auditor General and the Accounts Commission. We give independent assurance around value for money. If the money spent in Scotland, we check that it's being spent properly, efficiently and effectively. This audit was reporting to both the Auditor General and the Accounts Commission, so it considered the actions of Scottish Government and Transport Scotland, as well as councils and regional transport partnerships. We support public scrutiny that's fair, equal and open. And a big part of our work is that we report to the public. So we support transparency around public spending. There's 3 principles that guide our work. We are independent of the organisations that we audit. We report in public and we look at more than financial statements. So we also do performance audits like this one that looks at the economy, the efficiency and the effectiveness of public spending. Next slide, please. So as part of our performance audit programme, we considered the Scottish Government's target to reduce car use. We reported in January, and the overall aim of the audit was to assess what progress the Scottish Government and councils were making towards that target. And we looked at 3 questions to be able to answer that. The first was around how well are local and national governments working together to achieve a reduction. The second around funding and how clear it is around what's being spent on the target. And the last one around what progress is being made towards reducing car use and what are the key challenges. We didn't include electric vehicles as part of the scope of this audit, partly because we thought it would maybe kind of confuse the issue. There's kind of almost 2 separate issues there. One is around reducing car use and one is around the EV side of it. We also recognise that it wasn't necessarily a just transition at the moment, and it wouldn't be enough to achieve the Scottish Government's ambitious net zero targets. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background to the target and to the audit. So in Scotland, domestic transport is the largest source of emissions, and it's also reducing at a slower rate than any other emissions. And of that, cars make up the largest share of domestic transport emissions. So in 2019, the Scottish Government declared a climate emergency, and as part of that, it announced 2 overarching targets. One to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030, and another to be net zero by 2045. And it's clear that to be able to achieve either of those, they needed to drastically reduce car use. So as part of that, they published a climate change plan update in 2020, which included the target to reduce car use by 20% by 2030. However, in 2024, the 75% target to reduce emissions by 2030 was dropped. And in April 2025, when giving evidence on this report, the Cabinet Secretary confirmed that the 20% reduction in car use would also be changed. Next slide, please. So now moving on to the findings of our audit report. So starting off with the target, we found that the Scottish Government has set a very ambitious target. It was set to achieve that 75% reduction in emissions by 2030. It was set during the pandemic when car use had reduced drastically, and it was designed to be ambitious. It was designed to show ambition, but the level of ambition was too much. To hit that level, that 20% target, they would need to reduce car use to levels seen in 1994. So here we are, 4 years later. There's no costed delivery plan, no clear roles and responsibilities. There's no accountability for not delivering the target. There's no governance arrangements to monitor and scrutinise progress, and key documents remain in draft. And we've heard already how difficult this is. This isn't an easy target to achieve. We've heard that it relies on behaviour change of individuals. There's powers that the Scottish Government don't have around fuel duty that would make these kind of changes easier. So this is a difficult target to achieve. And the politics around it have also been difficult. Since setting the target, we've had 3 First Ministers in Scotland, 3 Cabinet Secretaries with a responsibility for transport. There's been a change in local government leadership. There's also been the ending of the Butte House Agreement, which was the power sharing agreement between the SNP and the Green Party. And there's been a UK general election. And next year we have a Scottish election. So politics keeps on moving and making this challenging. Next slide, please. We also looked at councils as part of this audit. So considering how they've supported the change, we looked at three councils as case studies, Aberdeenshire, Dumfries and Galloway and Glasgow. So that's taking in rural councils, urban councils, and Aberdeenshire have a fair bit of kind of commuter belt as well. We also looked at a regional transport partnership, which is TAC Trans in the Tayside region. And we found real variation between councils in terms of the priority that they placed on the target. The rural councils found it difficult to see how they could achieve the target, given longer distances and poorer public transport, and decided in general to focus on other priorities. We didn't see any of the councils monitoring the target specifically, and there was no groups responsible for monitoring its delivery or delivering the target within the council. We also didn't see the target considered when key decisions were being made. So things like planning, which would affect car use, we didn't see the target as part of that decision making. The Cabinet Secretary, when she announced that the target was being dropped, noted these findings and committed to looking at the regional differences when new guidance is drawn up and when the new target is published. Next slide, please. In terms of funding, this is a classic auditor region. We like to know how much is being spent, so to be able to assess value for money. And we set out with the goal initially of working out how much had been spent on the target to reduce car use. We quickly found that wasn't possible. So what we decided to cover was active travel and sustainable transport spending, so public transport. What we found was that any funding was complex, it was fragmented, and it lacks transparency. The Scottish Government and councils didn't record how much they were spending on the target, and didn't monitor the spend on the target. Although we found significant amounts of money were spent on public transport and active travel, we didn't see that consideration of where would have the most impact and which interventions delivered the best value for money. We also found instances where spending decisions actively conflicted with the target to reduce car use. So in Scotland, we had an intervention for a while to reduce peak fares, or to remove peak fares from the rail network. That was in place for some time, and then it was paused again. We've also have a bus partnership funding, which was to deliver bus lanes and bus gates, things that would make public transport more attractive. Again, that was paused. Both of which have come back in the most recent budget, but that pausing has kind of really given a message that this isn't a priority. And that's often because it's short-term funding pressures are kind of winning over these longer-term goals of climate. We also found that one-year funding is a significant barrier. A lot of these infrastructure projects are multi-year projects, and councils and others need the certainty of funding to be able to commit to it. In Scotland, there was some changing to how active travel funding was delivered, with more funding going through Transport Scotland and direct to councils, whereas previously it went through third sector partners. We found that should improve how funding operates, how active travel funding operates, but it's been a difficult first year in 24-25 with late allocations of funding and a lack of certainty. Next slide, please. So in terms of progress against target, we are going in the wrong direction. Car use has rebounded after the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, the number of kilometres driven is sitting below that of 2019, but still 17% away from where it needs to be to meet the target. And you can see in the graph there that emissions from transport have rebounded in the same way. The lighter blue line is the pathway, the anticipated pathway, and you can see that we're well away from that. We've also seen that public transport rates were falling before the pandemic and have continued to fall, and they haven't yet recovered to their pre-pandemic levels. And active transport rates have fluctuated. We see where there's been targeted investment, like the South City Way in Glasgow, that there is improvements, but across the country, we've seen no significant or sustained improvement. And we think this represents a major risk to delivering on net zero. And we recommend that the Scottish Government set out how they'll address that. We also found that it will be very difficult for Scottish Government and councils to achieve a significant reduction in transport emissions without unpopular decisions which to discourage car use. And by that, I mean things like demand management, so parking charges, workplace parking levies, or congestion charging. Next slide, please. So we made recommendations in our report to Scottish Government and to councils. And I think these are things that apply across the board for climate change targets and general policy commitments. We would like the Scottish Government as soon as possible to clarify its commitment to the target. So in April, the Cabinet Secretary announced that the target will be changed, and there's a new climate change plan coming this year. So we're hoping that the Scottish Government will set out a new target within that climate change plan, and think about how they can bring along councils and the public with them as part of that. Most importantly, once we have that new target, it's important to have a realistic delivery plan, one that sets out clear roles and responsibilities, costs, timescales, arrangements for monitoring, that will allow government and councils to prioritise which interventions will have the most impact and how they'll address those. We also recommend that the government publish guidance for councils on how to reduce car use, recognising what I said earlier around different challenges in different areas. And the Cabinet Secretary has indicated that that's likely to happen as part of the new target that's set. We'd like them to review the new system for active travel funding to see if that's addressed some of the challenges that they've identified and whether it's making a difference. I think one of the most important ones there is starting a national conversation with the public about their travel choices. We've heard already this morning how much of this is down to behaviour change and bringing everybody along with them. And I think being able to have that conversation, make people understand the benefits to them about choosing to travel more sustainably is really important. We spoke to some equality groups when we were doing this audit, and very few of them understood, or very few of them were aware of the target. So there's generally a lack of awareness around it. We also recommend that the joint governance arrangements are confirmed. Next slide, please. A few more recommendations here. One around reporting annually on spending, so that we can see which interventions have the most impact. Others can learn from that. And we recognise that that's difficult, that transport isn't black and white, that everything interacts with everything. But we think there could be more reporting annually on what's been spent and what impact that's had. Again, back to the equalities group, we recommend that the Scottish Government and councils and RTPs use the equalities impact assessment to consult with their communities and ensure that measures to reduce car use don't deepen inequalities. when we spoke to the equalities groups in our case study councils, there was a real fear that these measures to reduce car use and to achieve modal shift will actually have a negative impact on their lives. So it's working out how to do this without deepening inequalities and making life more difficult for others. And that's only going to happen with conversations with the communities and listening to them. Lastly, councils and RTPs should set out how they'll contribute to the target, but also share the good practice and learning. There's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of very dedicated people across Scotland working hard to achieve modal shift. And we think there could be more sharing of the good practice and the learning from that. Next slide, please. That's it from me. Thank you very much.